While native-born white Protestants fought one another, the North's immigrant Catholics often used the conflict to prove their Americanism. Most Catholic immigrants, including Irish, German, and French in this era, first turned to their church for identity and help navigating a new society. Bishops, for their part, believed that only a strong church could ease immigrants into American society. Many Protestants disliked Catholics and feared immigrants' strong loyalty to their church, as witnessed in the rise of the 1850s American, or Know-Nothing Party. The war provided these immigrants with an opportunity to prove their loyalty to their new nation. Church officials hurried to convey priests to military camps where they could look over Catholic soldiers and see to the spiritual needs of the wounded and dying. Catholic officials had already experienced Protestant efforts to steal souls among the impoverished and ill Catholic immigrants who turned to Protestant-dominated public institutions. Now they realized that Protestant chaplains might use the war as an opportunity for evangelism. Protestant officers often proved unwilling to accept Catholic priests as chaplains in units in which Catholic soldiers represented a minority. Most Catholic chaplains served ethnically identified Catholic units filled with Germans or Irishmen. The Civil War and emancipation changed the face of religion for a portion of the African American population as well. Many increasingly put aside traditional spirituals and other religious expressions in the African style as reminders of slavery and white stereotypes. While Jubilee singers and minstrel shows traveled the nation exhibiting these cultural forms, many black Christians turned toward their white brethren's more formal forms of worship. Abraham Lincoln reserved a special place in history for the American Republic, the last best hope of earth. But in his second inaugural address, Lincoln resisted identifying his war efforts with God's work. In his address, Lincoln produced a statement that rejected the Second Great Awakening's discredited religious moralism. But it also questioned the fierce moral certitude that had come to inform the Union and Confederate war efforts. Although Lincoln named slavery as the war's central cause, his insistence upon humility and democracy's constant discussion and revision of its goals restrained him from becoming an unforgiving Union partisan, even as he fought to crush the Confederate war effort. Instead, Lincoln interpreted the Civil War as God's judgment, however inscrutable, upon the United States, South and North. Lincoln's emphasis upon humility and democracy allowed him to speak with malice toward none, with charity for all. He noted of North and South that both read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. Ultimately, he based the Union's policies upon a contingent sense of purpose, acting with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right. In the words of one scholar, Lincoln believed that men had the duty to fulfill God's purposes as they could best understand them. The president had long been a religious skeptic, but the tragedy of war, coupled with personal losses, seemed to make him more receptive to faith. He brought an encyclopedic knowledge of the Bible, one of the few books available to him as a youth, to his task. Unlike so many of the ministers who opined on the significance of the Civil War, Lincoln did not claim to know God's wishes. The Almighty has his purposes, the president concluded, but humans might not discern them. Instead of a clear-cut claim that the Union fought for God, Lincoln embraced the notion that the democratic processes of constitutional government came to reveal God's purposes for the Union. Southerners had disrupted this process with secession, and Northern self-righteousness in victory might do the same. The pull and haul of politics thus influenced Lincoln's solemn address as well. The second inaugural's emphasis upon man's imperfect attempts to perceive the designs of an inscrutable God stood as a challenge to radical Republicans bold enough to believe that they could readily discern the war's purpose and the subsequent policies it required. Lincoln mused that men are not flattered by being shown that there has been a difference of purpose between the Almighty and them. To deny it, however, in this case, is to deny that there is a God governing the world. Lincoln's emphasis upon an inscrutable God allowed many Americans to accept the outcomes of the Civil War without the inner turmoil that accompanied a straightforward attempt to reconcile the tragedy with the humanitarian optimism of the antebellum period. Nevertheless, the war left an enormous void in American religious and cultural life. A God of goodness and mercy seemed far distant. Confronted with a more remote deity, many Americans began to succumb to the temptation to align their religion with the outlines of liberal individualism and self-interest. In 1859, the Englishman Charles Darwin had published The Origin of the Species, in which he outlined the natural processes that contributed to the evolution of life on Earth. Although the vast majority of Northerners had never heard of Darwin or his work by 1861's outbreak of hostilities, his vision of an Earth governed by natural processes echoed many war experiences. One Northern intellectual had concluded that nature is careless of the single life. Her processes seem wasteful, but out of seeming waste, she produces her great and durable results. In the decades following the Civil War, many American intellectuals and divines integrated what they perceived to be Darwin's central message into a new social philosophy that resembled nothing so much as the Confederacy's caricature of industrial society. Many set aside social responsibility, let alone benevolence, for an unvarnished pursuit of the main chance. Public unbelief became, for the first time, a part of American national life. Articulations of American civilization came to focus upon social manners and propriety, ignoring large questions of social inequality while defending accumulated wealth as the survival of the fittest. This great reversal in American intellectual life seems to pivot around the events of the Civil War. But Darwin's theories, in fact, reflected the culmination of a growing body of scientific research undermining the notion of a just God superintending life on Earth. The Civil War punctuated these accumulating doubts and anxieties with its seemingly endless procession of dead and wounded, suffering and ruin. In the future, Americans would seek surrogates for religion's once central position in their civic life. For many, science came to occupy this role. In place of antebellum religion's emphasis upon social progress rooted in individuals' inner transformations, science offered the prediction and control of natural and social phenomena. Increasingly, scientists and professionals came to assume the cultural authority once claimed by ministers. In the new cultural context, religion seemed to become an increasingly private realm, divorced from public life. Yet religious verities still informed laws as well as customs. As late as 1925, the state of Tennessee charged the schoolteacher John Scopes with the violation of a state law prohibiting the teaching of evolution in class.